We all love vampires. They are sexy, mysterious, and dangerous. They are also immortal beings that can never die unless you stake them in the heart or expose them to sunlight. But why do humans love vampires so much? One reason is because they represent death and darkness, which is something that humans have always been fascinated by since the dawn of time. But for some reason, this idea of vampires has resonated with modern-day humans for generations. For centuries, vampires have been one of the most popular monsters in fiction and folklore. Vampires are typically portrayed as blood-sucking undead with superhuman strength, speed, and abilities. The first vampire story was published in 1465 by an Italian writer named Girolamo Fracastoro in a Latin poem called De Vipera, or On the Viper. But it wasn't until 1745, when an English author named Richard Matheson wrote a short story called Dracula, that the modern vampire really took off as a popular icon. Since then, there have been many adaptations of Dracula, including an 1897 stage play by Hamilton Dean and John Loveday, and a 1931 film starring Bela Lugosi as Count Dracula himself. Even though Dracula is as much of a real person as Frankenstein's monster, we still all seem to love the idea of the vampire who started it all, and that is Count Dracula. Dracula Vlad the Impaler, who ruled his country in the late 15th century. He became infamous for his cruelty toward his enemies and their families, often executing them by impaling them alive on sharp stakes or tying them up over fires and burning them alive. This earned him the nickname Dracula, which means son of Draco, but also translates to something similar to Devil Dad. Vlad the Impaler inspired Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, although Stoker himself denied it. In fact, many historians believe that Bram Stoker based the character on Prince Vlad after reading about him in an early edition of Professor John Finley Curry's book A Handbook for Travelers in Romania. Bram Stoker's Dracula is a fictional character that was created by Irish author Bram Stoker in 1897. Dracula is the title character and main antagonist of the 1897 novel Dracula, and its subsequent films, theater productions, and other associated works. How Dracula is an undead vampire who sucks blood from his victims. He inhabits a castle in Transylvania where he has several brides or wives who bear him most beautiful children. Dracula also travels to England to spread evil throughout London. This story is told through letters between Dr. John Seward, who studies mental disorders, and his friend Abraham Van Helsing, who studies supernatural creatures. It takes place during Victorian times, when everyone was afraid of being bitten by a vampire, or catching rabies if they were bitten by one. We have also seen modern authors expand on the story of the vampire and bring them into our modern world. Just look at Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, which first introduced readers to an alternative history of vampires in society living normal lives with secret vampire identities. The first book in the series was Interview with the Vampire, which was published in 1976. It tells the story of Louis de Pointe-du-Lac, who has been alive for over 200 years and has seen many changes throughout his lifetime, including wars, religious persecution, and even a bloody revolution that drove them out into hiding from humans. While vampires are still hunted by an organization called the Talamasca, their existence is not widely known about by humans, and they appear as normal people without any obvious physical characteristics distinguishing them from regular folk. Vampires are a metaphor for all of these things, and more. In one fell swoop, they can be used to express the fear of death, the unknown, loneliness, rejection, and difference, all in a single narrative arc. Vampires are popular because they're easy to understand. There's no need for lengthy exposition about their origin story or why they're doing what they do. They're just monsters that prey on us. We don't have to know anything else about them beyond that. The subtlety of vampire storytelling allows us to fill in the gaps ourselves. And if our imaginations allow us enough leeway, we might even find ourselves sympathizing with them as much as fearing them. People also love vampires because they're sexy and dangerous. Vampires are both seductive, but they can also be dangerous. They're mysterious and independent. They're predators and prey. They're good, but they're also evil. People are drawn to this duality because in our world today there's an increasing feeling of powerlessness And we know that's not how the world should work. Vampires are dangerous. They kill people, they drink blood, and they can be hundreds of years old. In other words, they're a little bit scary. And that's why people love them so much. Vampires represent the things we fear most. Death, aging, and disease, but in an exciting way that makes us feel alive. Vampires are not just immortal, they're also superpowered. They can fly, control minds, and turn into animals. Plus, they have all these special powers like heightened senses and fast healing abilities, which make them even more formidable opponents than mere humans would be. Vampires have the supernatural ability to bite people and animals with their teeth without them getting hurt by this action. This is because vampires have fangs that can be retractable, which means they can be hidden when not in use. They also have super strong jaws that allow them to break through skin and bone easily with their sharp fangs. We also love vampires because they're independent. They don't need anyone else like humans do. They can be alone for centuries, and they are not afraid of it. Vampires don't need to rely on other people for their survival. They live in the shadows, biding their time until their next meal comes along. We love how much freedom this gives them, that even though vampires live by a different code than humans do, there are no rules that keep them from being independent and self-sufficient creatures who choose to spend their time alone rather than spending it with others. Another reason why we love vampires so much is that we all have predator and prey instincts. We all have been both predator and prey to someone or something else in our lives. And that's what makes vampires so compelling, because they are both evil and good, scary and sexy all at once. They are powerful or powerless depending on the moment. They can have everything in their grasp 1 minute, and be at the mercy of someone else the next minute. That's why vampires seem so human. We're all a little bit of these two sides of ourselves at all times. We as humans are constantly changing who we are depending upon, who we are feeding off of, and also who is feeding off of us. In the same way that vampires are neither good nor evil, they are also a metaphor for the human condition. Their struggle between life and death is mirrored in our own struggles. It's easy to see how this translates into such an alluring narrative when you consider how much of our time we spend worrying about one thing or another, whether it's choosing what to eat for dinner or deciding which movie to watch with friends. We're constantly weighing pros and cons in an attempt to make the best decision possible. But sometimes these decisions don't work out like we want them to, and sometimes they do. Vampires offer us a glance at immortality if we can find some way around their weaknesses of sunlight and being staked through the heart, which makes them even more desirable than other monsters because they give us a hope of existing forever, which removes the fears from not knowing what happens after we die. Vampires have been around for a long time, and there are many different stories about them. They're in movies, TV shows, books, comics, and more. Although they may fade away from pop culture for periods of time, I really don't see them going anywhere anytime soon. These mythical monsters are always waiting in the shadows of both our hearts and minds. To us that love them, they will always be immortal.